You know how most species see humans as mediocre? Well, Lieutenant Zara Cross just turned 6 Korak warriors into abstract art, using nothing but bar furniture and fermented alcohol. I was there at Nebula's Edge when she dismantled their entire squad while nursing a synthol. The thing about humans is they specialize in turning impossible situations into demolition derbies of ingenuity. You know how every spaceport bar has that one patron who's just trying to finish their drink in peace. Zara Cross was nursing her synthol in the corner of Nebula's Edge, her posture screaming, "Leave me alone," to anyone who understood human body language. Problem was, the 6 Korak warriors dominating the room didn't bother reading body language. They preferred making their own. These weren't your typical rowdy patrons. Koraks stand about 8 feet tall with natural dorsal plating that makes most energy weapons useless, and they move with that unsettling grace apex predators have when they know nothing in the room can challenge them. Their vocalizations started as general species baiting, the kind of background noise you learn to tolerate in multi-species establishments. But then their leader, this hulking specimen the regulars called Big Ugly, caught sight of Zara's human features, and the mood shifted from casually hostile to personally invested. Most species would have either apologized their way out or just bolted for the exit. But Zara's military background meant she was already doing threat assessment while still sipping her drink. That worn jacket she wore wasn't just fashion. The faded unit patches and laser scoring told anyone who knew how to look that this woman had been in situations where running wasn't an option. The Korak saw mediocre species and assumed easy target, which might be the most expensive assumption they'd ever make. True. Ugly made it personal when he questioned humanity's right to exist outside Earth's atmosphere, his vocalizer dripping with that particular contempt warriors reserve for those they consider beneath notice. The bar got so quiet you could hear the coolant system cycling. That's when Zara set her glass down with that precise click that echoes in sudden silence and gave them that smile, the one that doesn't reach the eyes. "The point is that we're the species dumb. Enough to fight you," she said, her voice calm like she was discussing docking procedures. You could see the confusion ripple through the Korak's body language. This wasn't how prey was supposed to behave. Their threat response protocols apparently didn't account for targets that volunteered for conflict, which brings us to the moment when furniture becomes artillery, ever. See a piece of furniture become a weapon of righteous fury? The first Korak made his move exactly like they train in their combat manuals. A straightforward lunge designed to overwhelm through sheer mass and intimidation. They've performed this dominance display across 100 frontier worlds, and it always ends the same way, with someone apologizing while trying to stop the bleeding. Zara didn't retreat or attempt to match strength. She redefined the terms of engagement completely. That bar stool she'd been perched on wasn't designed for combat. The manufacturer probably envisioned it supporting tired spacers, not cracking alien armor. But human creativity doesn't care about design specifications. She swung it in a wide, brutal arc that the Koraks never trained to defend. Against, because their tactical simulations don't include furniture-based warfare. Their natural dorsal plating protects against directed energy weapons and most projectile systems. The Korak's military-industrial complex spent centuries developing alloys that could withstand plasma bursts and molecular disruptors. What they never accounted for was 3 kilograms of polished durasteel moving at shoulder height with human adrenaline behind it. The impact wasn't clean or surgical, it was messy, brutal physics that transferred kinetic energy through armor into vulnerable biology. This whole phase demonstrated that human adaptability thing everyone talks about, but rarely witnesses firsthand. Zara turned a mundane environment into a personalized battlefield, where every ordinary object became a potential weapon. She wasn't fighting according to their rules or even standard combat doctrine. She was operating on that peculiar human frequency where obstacles become opportunities, and limitations spark innovation instead of surrender. Speed and cunning trumped raw strength because the Koraks didn't understand the rules being used against them. They kept waiting for her to respond with recognized combat patterns while she was busy rewriting the engagement parameters in real time. The first Korak went down hard, his systems failing to compute how something as simple as a swung chair could bypass centuries of defensive evolution. But here's the thing. One down just made the remaining 5 really angry. Their vocalizers hit that low-frequency harmonic that makes your teeth ache, and they started coordinating properly instead of relying on individual superiority. The situation should have turned decisively against Zara at that point, numerically and tactically. Except humans have this annoying habit of escalating in proportion to the opposition they face. Where most species would see 5 enraged warriors and calculate survival odds, Zara saw 5 problems that needed creative solutions. She was already scanning the environment for the next improvisational tool while the Corax were still processing their comrade's unexpected departure from consciousness. The beauty of it was how ordinary everything remained until she touched it. The bar wasn't specially reinforced. The stool wasn't weaponized furniture. It was all standard-issue spaceport equipment that suddenly became lethal in human hands. That's the psychological advantage they never teach in alien military academies, the ability to see potential where others see permanence. Which brings us to the moment when fermented alcohol stops being a recreational substance and starts being a tactical advantage. What happens when last call becomes a tactical advantage? The remaining Corax closed ranks with that coordinated movement their species perfects through instinct rather than training. They thought they'd adapted to Zara's unconventional approach, their massive bodies forming a living wall between her and the exit. Their confidence returned as they fell into familiar combat patterns, tight formation, overlapping fields of vision, the kind of tactical positioning that usually makes opponents reconsider their life choices. The tension came from their natural armor, making them nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. You could fire standard-issue plasma rifles at that dorsal plating all day, and maybe achieve superficial scoring if you were lucky. But every defense has its weakness, and human problem-solving specializes in finding those vulnerabilities that conventional warfare overlooks. Zara didn't see 5 invincible warriors. She saw 5 biological systems with specific design limitations. She grabbed bottles from the bar with that deliberate economy of motion that marks trained professionals. These weren't decorative pieces or fragile glassware. These were the heavy practical containers that frontier establishments use for bulk serving. The contents varied from synth whiskey to fermented Vulpin ale, but the common denominator was alcohol content that would make most species reconsider their life choices, if consumed in quantity. Fermented alcohol became acidic punishment applied directly to mucous membranes. The Corax never considered that their biological advantages could become vulnerabilities against creative targeting. Their eye membranes, nasal passages, the softer tissues around their vocalizers, all unprotected areas that most combatants wouldn't think to target because they're trained to aim for center mass or obvious weak points. Zara didn't just throw liquid. She applied it with percussive precision to the back of the skull where it would splash into multiple sensory organs simultaneously. Which brings us to the high-stakes job opportunities that find you after you demolish 6 alien warriors. Reputation has a way of preceding itself in frontier space, and Zara's educational demonstration had just rewritten her professional prospects in permanent marker. The bartender's cleanup operation was just beginning, but already the ripple effects were spreading through the station's economic networks. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come with the messiest classrooms. What kind of work finds you after you demolish 6 alien warriors? 3 days later, Zara sat in a different establishment, negotiating the kind of contract that tests mobility beyond barroom brawls. The nervous Altarian trader across from her kept adjusting his robe's fasteners, while pitching a cargo run that danced along the edges of moral ambiguity. His name was Crix, and he moved with that particular twitchiness that suggests someone who's recently discovered their business model might have unexpected consequences. The tension came from the cargo itself, medical supplies in the form of combat stimulants that occupied that gray area between legitimate pharmaceuticals and controlled substances. 50,000 credits compensated for the obvious risks, but the real value wasn't in the payment. Those stims represented survival leverage for crews operating. In sectors where pirate ambushes were standard, operational hazards and enforcement scrutiny could mean the difference between profit and prison. Crix kept describing them as completely legitimate medical supplies with that verbal tick people develop when navigating licensing complexities. The stimulants accelerated healing and enhanced combat effectiveness, which made them invaluable for private security teams and borderline illegal for civilian transport. Their profit margins reflected the dangers involved in moving them through regulated space, and their survival value made them worth the considerable risks for crews facing hostile environments. Zara's decision to accept the contract reflected that relentless human appetite for leverage in a galaxy where danger consistently translates to profit. She didn't see moral ambiguity. She saw practical solutions to survival problems. The stimulants could mean the difference between a successful extraction and becoming another casualty report in sectors where official help never arrives. Her reputation for creative problem-solving had attracted exactly the kind of work that tested those abilities beyond theoretical scenarios. The resolution came with handshake agreements and transfer of preliminary funds, the whole exchange conducted with that quiet efficiency that marks professionals who understand mutual benefit. Reputation had delivered lucrative but perilous work, foreshadowing challenges that would require more than improvised furniture and chemical weapons. This wasn't about proving points anymore, it was about operational survival in environments where mistakes meant permanent retirement. But here's the thing, some opportunities come with unexpected complications. Crix kept glancing toward the establishment's entrance with that nervous energy that suggests either paranoia or practical caution. His explanations about licensing paperwork contained just enough specificity to sound legitimate, while leaving sufficient ambiguity to maintain plausible deniability. The stimulants themselves occupied that interesting space where medical necessity meets tactical advantage, their legality depending entirely on destination, documentation, and which enforcement agency happened to be asking questions. The profit margins made sense when you considered the operational realities of frontier space. Crews facing pirate attacks needed rapid healing capabilities, and private security teams operating beyond official support networks required enhanced performance to survive overwhelming odds. The stimulants represented that intersection of medicine and survival, where ethics become flexible based on immediate needs. Their immense survival value created market dynamics that conventional regulation struggled to address. Zara's calculations involved more than credit transfers and risk assessments. She was evaluating the broader implications of becoming known for handling controversial cargo, the way this decision would shape future opportunities and constraints. Reputation in frontier space operates like currency. It attracts certain possibilities while closing others, and once you establish patterns, they tend to define your operational parameters for the foreseeable future. The thing about high-stakes opportunities is they rarely arrive with complete disclosure. Crix provided just enough information to make the venture plausible while maintaining sufficient ambiguity to protect his own interests. The stimulants might be perfectly legal with proper documentation, or they might require creative interpretations of interstellar medical regulations. In frontier space, the difference often comes down to who's asking the questions and how much they care about technical compliance. Which brings us to the moment when heavily armed enforcers enter the equation. Reputation attracts attention from multiple directions, and not all of it comes with business proposals. The same qualities that made Zara attractive to nervous traders also drew scrutiny from authorities who monitor unconventional cargo movements. Opportunities and complications often arrive from the same source, just wearing different uniforms and carrying different types of leverage. How do you handle galactic law enforcement when you're wanted for questioning? The job's promise got interrupted when 3 hegemony enforcers entered the establishment, with that particular swagger that comes from institutional authority and heavy weaponry. Their arrival changed the atmosphere from business negotiation to potential incarceration in the space of a standard breath. Captain Jack Boot led with overbearing certainty about his arrest authority, his posture suggesting that compliance was the only acceptable response to his presence. They were looking for a human female with military background, specifically connected to Gamma 7's recent incident. Their scanning equipment already had biometric signatures locked, and their body language indicated they considered this a routine retrieval operation. The tension came from their assumption that procedures would unfold according to standard enforcement protocols: identification, apprehension, transportation to holding facilities. They'd performed this sequence countless times across multiple systems, and their confidence reflected that institutional experience. Zara treated the encounter as performance art rather than genuine arrest procedure. Her responses contained just enough compliance to avoid immediate escalation, while maintaining that sardonic edge that keeps opponents off balance. She offered identification with theatrical reluctance, asked questions about jurisdictional authority with mock curiosity, and generally behaved like someone who found the whole situation mildly amusing rather than professionally concerning. Her quips and sardonic charm baited the enforcers while buying tactical time. She'd comment on their equipment choices, question their procedural decisions, and generally behave in ways that enforcement personnel aren't trained to handle. Where they expected fear or compliance, they got witty observations about institutional bureaucracy. The dynamic shifted from straightforward arrest to psychological chess match, with Zara controlling the tempo through calculated unpredictability. This is me buying time while I figure out how to turn 3 heavily armed opponents into a learning experience, she mentioned casually to Crix, who was currently attempting to achieve molecular bonding with the wall behind him. The statement wasn't bravado. It was tactical assessment, delivered with that dry humor that seems to be standard issue for humans in stressful situations. The confrontation shifted from legal authority to spectacle, where creativity became the primary weapon. The enforcers kept trying to reassert standard procedures, while Zara kept introducing variables they hadn't trained to handle. Their equipment was designed for straightforward apprehensions, not conversational chess matches where the rules kept changing. They'd bring up regulations, she'd question their interpretation. They'd reference authority. She'd ask about oversight committees. The whole exchange became increasingly surreal as institutional certainty met flexible thinking. She wasn't attempting chemical burns or permanent damage. The goal was maximum disorientation, temporary sensory overload that would neutralize their coordination advantage. The first warrior to receive this treatment staggered like his gyroscopic systems had failed, his vocalizer emitting confused static as alcohol seeped into places evolution never intended for it to reach. His comrades hesitated, their tactical training offering no protocol for someone weaponizing bar inventory. This move reinforced that human problem-solving exploits environment and assumptions rather than pure power. The Corax expected escalation of force, not transformation of purpose. They prepared for stronger weapons, not creative reapplication of available resources. Their entire combat doctrine assumed opponents would operate within recognized parameters of engagement. The chemical surprise neutralized their armor's advantage completely. Another warrior went down not from impact trauma, but from systemic confusion, his neural pathways overwhelmed by conflicting sensory input. The remaining Corax recoiled with instinctive disgust, their coordinated formation breaking as they tried to distance themselves from the spreading liquid and its disorienting effects. Then again, alcohol wasn't the only thing behind that bar waiting to be used. The bartender's setup included cleaning solutions, pressurized dispensers, and various maintenance tools that most patrons would overlook entirely. Zara's eyes were already cataloging these possibilities, while the Corax were still processing the unexpected turn in combat methodology. The real advantage wasn't the specific chemicals she'd used, it was the demonstration that anything in the environment could become part of her arsenal if the situation demanded creative solutions. Why do humans throw things when they could use proper weapons? With 2 Corax down, Zara needed to manage multiple attackers while creating operational space. The remaining warriors assumed projectiles indicated desperation rather than strategy, that classic misreading of human tactical behavior that gets so many species into trouble. Here's what most species don't understand about human projectile combat. It's not about maximizing damage or achieving clean eliminations. The real purpose is disruption, disorientation, and forcing predictable reactions. Zara wasn't trying to knock anyone out with a thrown glass. She was creating a chaotic obstacle course that would break their tactical coordination. She launched everything within reach. Heavy-bottomed glasses that spun unpredictably, bottles that shattered into secondary hazards, even decorative metal emblems that clattered against armor with distracting resonance. Each thrown object served specific psychological purposes: breaking concentration during crucial moments, testing defensive reflexes to identify patterns, controlling movement by making certain areas temporarily undesirable to occupy. The bar transformed into her personal chessboard, where every object possessed tactical value beyond its intended function. A heavy ashtray became an area denial tool when it skittered across the floor near a warrior's feet. A stack of drink coasters created visual distraction when fanned through the air. Even the condensation on glasses became a factor when she'd wipe her hands between throws to maintain grip security. Her calculated, Unpredictability epitomized that core HFY thesis about constraints becoming clever advantages. She worked with what was available rather than wishing for proper weapons, and in doing so demonstrated why human improvisation terrifies species that rely on standardized equipment and procedures. The Corax kept expecting her to run out of ammunition or make a mistake born of desperation, but she maintained that economy of motion that marks trained professionals operating within their element. The crowd's perception shifted dramatically during this phase. Where there had been pity or morbid curiosity, now there was genuine awe. Patrons began noticing details they'd missed initially. The precise footwork that kept her just outside optimal striking range, the way she used throws to hurt opponents into disadvantageous positions, the constant environmental scanning that meant she never reached for an object without knowing what came next. 3. Corax went down from combination attacks they never saw coming. One caught a bottle to the faceplate during a moment of distraction, followed by a kick to a vulnerable joint. Another slipped on spilled liquids while tracking a thrown object, his massive body becoming its own enemy when momentum met gravity. The fourth fell to a simple but brutal reality. Even armored warriors need to breathe, and a well-placed elbow to the diaphragm works regardless of what armor you're wearing. Which brings us to that moment when tables stop being furniture and start being tactical infrastructure. The remaining 2 Corax finally understood they weren't in a fight anymore. They were participants in a demonstration of applied physics and psychology. Their confidence had been systematically dismantled along with their squad, and now they faced the uncomfortable realization that they'd fundamentally misjudged both their opponent and the situation they'd created. The beauty of human projectile combat isn't in the throwing itself, but in the strategic thinking behind each seemingly random act. Every object launched served multiple purposes simultaneously, creating layered effects that conventional warriors struggle to process. Where the Corax saw discrete attacks, Zara was conducting a symphony of controlled chaos where every note influenced the next movement. How does flipping furniture create tactical advantages? With 4 Corax down, the remaining 2 became more cautious but no less dangerous. Their movements took on that measured quality predators display when they realized their prey might actually be poisonous. The tension came from Zara needing both cover and time to plan her final moves against opponents who still held numerical superiority. She couldn't keep relying on thrown objects and chemical surprises. The situation demanded structural changes to the battlefield itself. That heavy table wasn't just furniture anymore, it became mobile, cover and impact weapons simultaneously. The thing most species miss about furniture flipping is how it transforms spatial relationships in combat. Zara didn't just overturn it dramatically. She positioned it with specific angles calculated to break sightlines and create choke points. The table's mass provided temporary protection, while its new orientation forced the Corax to navigate around obstacles rather than taking direct paths. Flipping, it created a barrier that divided the combat area into manageable segments. Suddenly, the Corax couldn't approach simultaneously from multiple vectors. They had to navigate around this new obstacle, which meant Zara only had to deal with one at a time. She turned their numerical advantage into a liability by making them operate in confined spaces where their size worked against them. The table's edges created natural boundaries that controlled engagement angles and limited their tactical options. The Corax now had to navigate unfamiliar territory, while Zara moved through space she'd mentally mapped. During the initial confrontation, every overturned chair, every scattered piece of debris became part of her defensive network. She used the table's solid surface to block attacks that would have been dangerous in open space, letting their own momentum work against them when strikes connected with unyielding durasteel instead of flexible human anatomy. This demonstrated environmental mastery at a level most combat trainers don't bother teaching. Zara read the space for tactical potential others would miss entirely. While the Corax saw obstacles, she saw opportunities. The table's position created a kill zone where she could engage one opponent, while the other had to circle around, buying precious seconds to execute decisive actions. She used the mass to absorb impacts that would have broken bones if taken directly, then leveraged the stability to launch counterstrikes from protected positions. Every object in the vicinity got assessed for combat utility during this phase. Chairs became tripping hazards when slid into approaching paths. Decorative plants in heavy pots offered both concealment and additional projectiles. Even the floor itself became part of the equation. Spilled liquids created slippery patches that affected the heavier Corax more than the nimble human. This comprehensive environmental awareness turned the entire bar into her personal tactical simulation. The resolution came when another warrior went down hard over the newly created obstacle course. He misjudged the table's height during an aggressive lunge, his armored body catching the edge at an awkward angle that transferred all his momentum into the floor. The impact resonated through the deck plates with that sickening finality that means joint integrity has been permanently compromised. 5 down, 1 remaining. But here's the thing, the last one standing finally understood what they were dealing with. His body language shifted from aggressive dominance to defensive calculation. The vocalizer emitted low-frequency pulses that might have been communication attempts or just biological stress responses. He stopped trying to overwhelm through force and started looking for exits, reassessing the human not as mediocre prey, but as a legitimate tactical threat. The table between them wasn't furniture anymore. It was a statement about how humans redefine conflict parameters. What happens when the bully realizes he picked the wrong victim? The last Karak stood alone in that wrecked bar. His confidence systemically dismantled piece by piece through a masterclass in creative leverage. His vocalizer emitted low-frequency distress pulses that seemed to question the fundamental realities of the universe. This wasn't about winning a fight anymore. It had become something far more consequential. Zara didn't approach him like a combatant moving in for the kill. She moved with that economy of purpose that suggests the outcome has already been decided, and what follows is merely demonstration. The tension shifted from physical threat to psychological revelation. This final confrontation wasn't about neutralizing one last warrior. It was about demonstrating to everyone watching that tactical diversity could systematically overwhelm even the most impressive brute force. She didn't even bother with dramatic maneuvers. The victory came through precise application of principles she'd established throughout the engagement. When the Karak made his final desperate charge, Zara used the overturned table as a pivot point, redirecting his momentum into a support column with that clean efficiency that makes complex physics look simple. The impact resonated through the structure with finality, the sound of armor meeting immovable object at precisely the wrong angle. The win was strategic rather than spectacular, rooted in exploiting environment and enemy underestimation rather than superior strength or technology. She'd turned his own assumptions against him, using predictability as a weapon more effectively than any physical tool. The Korak went down not from some exotic technique, but from the cumulative effect of being systematically outthought at every turn. Patrons who moments earlier had viewed humans with casual contempt now watched with that particular mixture of fear and awe that changes galactic relations. You could see the recalibration happening in real time, facial membranes shifting color, appendages repositioning in non-threatening configurations, entire body languages rewriting themselves to acknowledge new realities. The collective perception of humanity shifted from mediocre species to potential threat in the space of that final impact. The tale began mutating into legend before the last body even hit the floor. Whispers spread through the crowd about exotic martial arts and rumored capabilities humans supposedly possessed. Someone claimed she'd used pressure point techniques that bypassed armor entirely. Another insisted they'd seen energy fields around her hands during the final strike. The actual physics of what happened became secondary to the mythological implications of a single human, defeating 6 Korak warriors with bar equipment. Station Gamma 7's perception of humanity underwent permanent alteration in that moment. The incident became immediate local lore, with patrons already retelling versions to newcomers who arrived after the action concluded. The details grew more dramatic with each retelling. The number of opponents increased, the weapons became more improbable, the victory more complete. Zara transformed from competent officer to near mythological figure in the space of a standard hour. Which brings us to the aftermath and what happens when you become legendary. The wreckage of Nebula's Edge stood as physical testament to how quickly reputation can change in frontier space. Broken furniture, spilled liquids, and groaning warriors created a tableau that would define human-Korak relations for cycles to come. But the real damage wasn't to the bar's infrastructure, it was to the galaxy's comfortable assumptions about human limitations. Then again, some lessons require visual demonstrations to really stick. The bartender's sigh as he surveyed the damage contained multitudes: insurance claims, repair costs, the headache of explaining to management why their establishment had become ground zero for interspecies reputation adjustment. But beneath the practical concerns lingered that dawning realization that the galaxy might have fundamentally misjudged an entire species based on incomplete data. The thing about humans is they specialize in providing corrective data through practical application. How does cleaning up a bar fight change your perspective on species? The bartender surveyed the wreckage with a sigh that contained more meaning than a diplomatic communique. His 4 appendages hung limp at his sides as he took inventory of the damage: 3 tables beyond repair, 12 chairs reduced to components, assorted glassware that would require restocking from off-station suppliers. The tension wasn't just about insurance premium paperwork looming in his future, though that was certainly a factor. What really weighed on him was the fundamental shift in understanding that had just occurred in his establishment. His dry comment to nobody in particular, well, that was educational, encapsulated the entire experience better than any official report could. The words carried that particular resonance of someone whose worldview has been forcibly expanded against their will. He'd seen bar fights before, certainly. Species disagreements that turned physical were practically part of the business model at multi-species establishments, but this was different in ways that would require rewriting several chapters of his operational assumptions. Patrons who witnessed the event were already retelling it with exaggerations and embellishments. A Vulcan near the exit described impossible acrobatics that defied basic physics. A group of traders from the rimward colonies swore they'd seen energy fields around the humans' hands during the final confrontation. The account of Zara's victory was blooming into something beyond what actually occurred, the details evolving with each retelling to fit preconceived notions about human capabilities. This whole phenomenon served as commentary on reputation, memory, and how the defeat of bullies propagates through culture. The crowd's reaction showed that particular mixture of fear, awe, and new caution that emerges when comfortable assumptions get shattered. Species who'd previously dismissed humans as mediocre now regarded them with that wary respect usually reserved for potentially venomous creatures. You could see the recalculations happening in real time, facial expressions shifting, body language adjusting, entire social hierarchies being mentally rearranged. The resolution came in watching how Zara's act redefined what a mediocre human could accomplish when properly motivated. The bartender's educational experience wasn't about learning human combat techniques. It was about understanding that threat assessment requires looking beyond surface characteristics. His establishment had become a classroom where the curriculum involved rethinking fundamental assumptions about strength, capability, and the nature of conflict itself. Then again, education sometimes comes with expensive cleanup costs. The practical reality of broken furniture and damaged equipment would require dealing with station management, filing incident reports, and explaining why his bar looked like a demolition derby had occurred. But beneath those immediate concerns lingered the dawning realization that his establishment had just hosted a cultural turning point. The insurance claims would be paperwork. The shifted perceptions would last generations. The thing about interspecies education is that it rarely happens in classrooms or diplomatic meetings. Real understanding occurs in messy, unpredictable environments where theory meets practice in ways nobody anticipates. That sigh the bartender emitted contained the weight of someone who just received an education he hadn't known he needed, delivered through means he wouldn't have chosen, with costs he couldn't have predicted. His bar was wrecked, his inventory depleted, his insurance premiums likely to increase. But his understanding of the galaxy had expanded in ways that would affect how he operated forever. Resolution came when Zara challenged their expectation of predictable outcomes, setting up another improvisational masterpiece. She didn't resist or flee. She engaged them on philosophical grounds they weren't prepared to defend. Questions about ethical enforcement, discussions about proportional response, observations about conflict escalation. She turned what should have been routine paperwork into a seminar on applied ethics with live demonstrations. You know how most species expect compliance when facing overwhelming force. Humans specialize in educational experiences. The enforcers found themselves in the unusual position of having to justify their actions to someone they were supposed to be arresting. Their training covered weapon retention and restraint techniques, not Socratic dialogue in bar settings. The power dynamic shifted from enforcement to debate club with tactical implications. Captain Jack Boot's frustration became increasingly visible through his body language. His grip tightened on his equipment, his vocal modulator showed slight fluctuations, and his secondary appendages displayed telltale signs of cognitive overload. He was dealing with someone who treated arrest procedures as interactive theater rather than serious business, and his systems weren't equipped for that particular engagement profile. The thing about institutional enforcement is that it relies on predictability. Procedures assume certain responses to specific actions, and when those responses don't materialize, the whole system experiences processing errors. Zara wasn't following the script, which meant the enforcers had to either improvise or fall back on increasingly rigid applications of protocol. Neither option worked particularly well against someone who viewed rules as suggestions rather than constraints, which brings us to the moment when expensive liquor stops being beverage and starts being combat equipment. The enforcers were still trying to process the philosophical implications of their actions when Zara began repurposing the environment around her. Their tactical training hadn't covered scenarios where suspects used bar inventory as teaching aids, and that gap in their education was about to become painfully apparent. What happens when expensive liquor becomes combat equipment? Zara began her response by flipping another table with that economical motion that never wastes energy. The heavy surface crashed sideways to create chaos corridors between the enforcers, breaking their coordinated approach into isolated segments. The tension came from their expectation of standardized resistance procedures. They'd trained for straightforward compliance or conventional combat, not this playground kinetic mastery that treated furniture like modular battlefield components. A Thermonian fire wine bottle became provocative chemical tool rather than beverage. These particular vintage containers retail for about 200 credits each in decent establishments, but Zara wasn't concerned with market value. The bottle's contents produced distinctive thermal signatures when exposed to oxygen, something the enforcers' armor sensors weren't programmed to handle during routine apprehension operations. She didn't throw it like a projectile. She smashed it against a structural support column at precise height to maximize aerosol distribution. The heat bloom from shattered glass made armor sensors misread the battlefield completely. Thermal imaging systems designed to track body heat and energy weapons suddenly registered multiple false hotspots across the engagement area. The first enforcer staggered as his heads-up display flooded with conflicting data, his targeting systems attempting to process thermal signatures that didn't match any known weapon profile. His movements became hesitant, uncertain whether to respond to visual threats or sensor readings. Second enforcer attempted direct assault, but slipped on the accumulating spills and alcohol residues. His tactical boots lost traction on the suddenly slick surface, their grip enhancements useless against the particular viscosity of mixed alcohols and cleaning solutions. The stumble broke his assault rhythm, forcing him to focus on balance recovery rather than combat effectiveness. His weapon's targeting system swung wildly as he fought to maintain upright position. Zara used movement, leverage, and mistimed confidence against trained professionals. She didn't try to match their strength or technology. She exploited the disorientation caused by environmental factors they hadn't considered threats. Her footwork maintained traction by using dry patches and textured surfaces they overlooked in their sensor-dependent approach. Every movement served multiple purposes: positioning for advantage, creating additional hazards, maintaining situational awareness while opponents struggled with processing overload. She bounced between walls, shelves, and structural features, turning environment into ally. A decorative shelf unit became momentary cover when she used its angles to break line of sight. Wall-mounted fixtures served as handholds for rapid changes of direction that didn't register on motion tracking systems. The establishment's architecture ceased being background scenery and became active participant in the confrontation, with every element offering potential advantages to someone who understood practical physics. Captain Jack Boot admitted the oddity of human methods with that particular vocal strain that suggests someone reevaluating their career choices. Welcome to Fighting Humans. We specialize in irregular. The statement contained multiple layers of meaning: acknowledgement of unconventional tactics, resignation about procedural inadequacies, and that dawning realization that standard enforcement techniques might require revision when dealing with species that treat rules as suggestions. The resolution came through systematic environmental manipulation rather than direct confrontation. Zara didn't overpower the enforcers. She outthought them using resources they didn't recognize as relevant. Their training assumed certain parameters about combat engagements, and when those parameters shifted outside expected boundaries, their effectiveness decreased proportionally. The Thermonian Firewine wasn't weaponized in the conventional sense. It became a tool for reshaping engagement conditions to favor creative problem-solving over standardized responses. This entire sequence demonstrated why human improvisation frustrates species that rely on established protocols. The enforcers had superior equipment, numerical advantage, and institutional authority, but they couldn't process an opponent who treated expensive liquor as tactical equipment and furniture as modular battlefield components. Their systems were designed for predictable conflicts, not for scenarios where the environment itself becomes an active participant in the engagement. The thing about expensive alcohol is that its value shifts based on context. 200 credits for atmospheric enhancement seems reasonable until someone repurposes it for sensory overload operations. The enforcers kept trying to reassert control through standard procedures, while Zara kept introducing variables their training manuals hadn't anticipated. This fundamental mismatch between institutional thinking and adaptive creativity created opportunities that pure force couldn't overcome. How do you use fundamental laws of physics against trained enforcers? With two enforcers incapacitated by environmental factors they never saw as threats, Zara focused her attention on Captain Jack Boot and the bar's structural features. The tension came from his representation of institutional authority that fundamentally cannot comprehend improvisational genius. He kept trying to re-establish procedure while Zara kept rewriting the rules of engagement using principles no enforcement manual anticipates. You triggered the emergency release on the external airlock with that precise timing that suggests pre-calculation rather than desperation. The mechanism wasn't designed for tactical applications. Standard safety protocols require clear evacuation paths in case of pressurization failures. But human creativity specializes in repurposing safety features for offensive advantages. The release created pressure-driven opportunity while the hull remained pressurized, generating atmospheric currents that affected equilibrium and balance. This forced the enforcers toward the threshold into chaotic, physics-based evacuation scenarios their training hadn't covered. Their armor compensated for vacuum operations, but assumed controlled transitions rather than sudden environmental shifts. The pressure differential created unexpected forces that disrupted their tactical positioning, turning what should have been stable footing into precarious situations requiring constant adjustment. Their systems attempted to compensate for multiple variables simultaneously, overloading processing capacity with conflicting priority signals. Which brings us to why appearing mediocre becomes the ultimate strategic advantage in a galaxy that values obvious strengths. The constant underestimation creates operational space that more impressive species never enjoy, allowing humans to operate below notice until circumstances demand demonstration of their particular talents. This perceptual gap between appearance and capability might be humanity's most valuable export to the galaxy, though it's not something you'll find listed on any standard manifest or trade agreement. Why does appearing mediocre become the ultimate weapon? Zara's ongoing adventures serve as practical lessons in human unpredictability and resilience that most species learn the hard way. The tension comes from how most alien civilizations train for combat against known quantities, with predictable responses. Their tactical doctrines assume opponents will operate within recognized parameters using standardized equipment and established procedures. This creates systemic blind spots that human improvisation exploits with brutal efficiency. Humans simply refuse categorization, bringing this raw improvisational spirit to every confrontation regardless of scale or stakes. Where other species see constraints, humans see potential variables. This fundamental difference in perception creates strategic advantages against opponents who rely on standardized tactics and predictable escalation patterns. Zara's particular brand of creative problem-solving turns any situation into what might charitably be called demolition derbies of ingenuity, where conventional limitations become starting points for innovation, rather than endpoints for capability. The story finds her heading into hyperspace once again, her reputation preceding her like advance warning of approaching weather systems. The adventure was just getting started, serves as both statement of fact and subtle warning about the ongoing impact of human unpredictability. Each new system brings fresh opportunities to demonstrate that obstacles aren't barriers, but invitations to creative solutions. Resolution comes down to this simple reality. Do not underestimate a species that treats obstacles as opportunities. The galactic community continues learning this lesson through repeated demonstrations that appear miraculous until you understand the underlying principles. Human capabilities aren't supernatural. They're just operating on different problem-solving frequencies than most species anticipate. You know how most combat manuals don't cover barstool combat techniques or environmental repurposing strategies? That's precisely the point. Human advantage lies in that gap between trained expectations and practical creativity. While other species develop better weapons or stronger armor, humans develop better ways to use whatever's available. This approach doesn't require technological superiority or biological advantages. It thrives on flexibility and adaptability. The thing about unpredictability is that it can't be effectively counter-trained. You can prepare for known variables and establish tactics, but how do you prepare for opponents who treat physics as a toolkit and environment as modular components? Military academies across the galaxy struggle with this conceptual challenge. Their curricula based on measurable capabilities and quantifiable threats. Human improvisation exists outside those analytical frameworks, operating in the spaces between established categories. Zara's continued success demonstrates that this unpredictability creates sustainable advantages beyond individual confrontations. Her reputation opens doors that would remain closed to more conventionally impressive species, precisely because she represents capabilities that can't be easily quantified or countermeasured. Clients don't hire her for specific skills. They hire her for that demonstrated ability to solve problems outside normal parameters. This strategic advantage extends beyond combat situations into business negotiations, crisis management, and operational planning. The same creative thinking that turns furniture into weapons also finds solutions to logistics problems, navigational challenges, and diplomatic complications. Human unpredictability becomes this multi-purpose tool that functions equally well in physical confrontations and abstract problem-solving. The galaxy keeps trying to categorize and quantify human capabilities, missing the essential point that the advantage lies in the refusal to be categorized. Standardized testing and threat assessment protocols consistently underestimate human potential because they're designed to measure known quantities rather than adaptive potential. This measurement gap creates ongoing opportunities for humans to exceed expectations and redefine possibilities. Then again, some advantages can't be easily explained through conventional analysis. The human tendency to see potential where others see limitations operates on principles that don't fit neatly into tactical manuals or threat assessment databases. This isn't something that can be reverse engineered or effectively countermeasured. It's baked into how humans perceive and interact with their environment, which brings us back to why looking mediocre might be the perfect disguise in a galaxy that values obvious strengths. The perceptual gap between appearance and capability creates operational space that more impressive species never enjoy. While others must constantly demonstrate their strengths to maintain status, humans operate below notice until circumstances demand demonstration of their particular talents. This strategic humility might be their most valuable unacknowledged advantage. Why do advanced species consistently misread human capabilities? Galactic cultures place tremendous value on obvious strengths: natural armor that deflects energy, weapons technological superiority that overwhelms defenses, biological advantages that guarantee victory in straightforward confrontations. Their entire threat assessment system operates on visible metrics and quantifiable advantages. Humans present a completely different profile that doesn't register properly on those standardized evaluation scales. The tension comes from humans possessing traits that aren't immediately visible, but become absolutely devastating when circumstances demand their application. Stubbornness, improvisation, and creative problem-solving don't show up on scanners or tactical readouts. You can't measure determination with spectrographic analysis or quantify adaptability through biometric scanning. These are capabilities that remain hidden until activated by necessity, which creates this massive intelligence gap in how other species perceive human potential. The central irony operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Humans get underestimated precisely because they appear unimpressive when evaluated against conventional metrics. Their physical characteristics seem average, their technology often litters behind more advanced species, and their biological capabilities don't include natural weapons or special defenses. This apparent mediocrity becomes the perfect camouflage for capabilities that conventional analysis doesn't think to measure. This psychological blind spot transforms into their greatest strategic advantage during actual confrontations. Opponents approach with confidence born of superior visible characteristics, only to discover that human creativity operates outside established combat parameters. Zara's victory at Nebula's Edge demonstrated how expectations shape outcomes long before physical engagement begins. The Corax assumed victory based on measurable advantages while completely missing the adaptive intelligence that would neutralize those advantages through unconventional methods. Species that assume superiority based on visible metrics often miss the subtle signs of this adaptive intelligence. They're trained to evaluate threat potential through conventional lenses: weapon quality, armor integrity, biological enhancements. Human capabilities exist in the spaces between those categories, in how they use available resources rather than what resources they possess. This evaluation gap creates opportunities that humans consistently exploit through creative applications of basic principles. Resolution comes through understanding that underestimation creates operational space for those willing to exploit perceptual gaps. The galaxy's consistent misreading of human capabilities provides strategic advantages that more impressive species never enjoy. While others must demonstrate strength to maintain status, humans operate below notice until circumstances demand demonstration of their particular problem-solving talents. This allows them to conserve resources, avoid unnecessary confrontations, and choose when to reveal their capabilities for maximum effect. Which brings us back to why looking mediocre might be the perfect disguise in a galaxy obsessed with visible power. The perceptual gap between human appearance and actual capability creates opportunities that species with obvious advantages can't access. Their unimpressive exterior serves as effective camouflage that allows them to operate in spaces where more threatening species would attract immediate scrutiny. This strategic humility becomes another tool in their problem-solving toolkit, another variable they can manipulate to achieve objectives. The thing about psychological advantages is their renewable resources. Each new generation of alien tacticians must learn the same lessons about human capabilities through practical experience rather than theoretical study. The underestimation continues because it's built into how galactic cultures perceive and evaluate threat potential. Humans don't fit the established categories, so they get placed in the mediocre classification by default, creating this ongoing cycle of surprise and recalibration. The exchange highlighted that recurring motif about humans winning by exploiting principles that exist outside combat manuals. Zara didn't use advanced technology or superior strength. She used basic physics applied with timing and precision. The airlock mechanism became a tool for manipulating atmospheric pressure, gravity assumptions, and structural integrity in ways that gave her advantages without direct confrontation. She worked with fundamental realities rather than against them, turning the environment's inherent properties into weapons. Physics, she said with cheerful accuracy, as Captain Boot struggled to maintain position against unexpected air currents. It's not just a good idea. It's the law. The statement contained multiple layers of meaning, acknowledging the fundamental principles she was employing, commenting on enforcement's relationship with rules, and delivering that dry humor that seems to be humanity's default setting in stressful situations. The enforcers were trying to enforce regulations while she was demonstrating unchangeable natural laws. Resolution came when all three enforcers found themselves incapacitated through systematic application of environmental physics. Captain Boot ended up pinned against a structural support by air pressure differentials, his armor systems overwhelmed by competing demands for stability, atmospheric compensation, and threat assessment. The other two enforcers experienced similar systemic overloads, their technology struggling to handle multiple physical principles being manipulated simultaneously. Their arrogance got punctured by this unorthodox victory that used safety features as offensive tools. They'd arrived expecting compliance or conventional resistance and instead received a practical demonstration of applied physics that their training hadn't prepared them to counter. The defeat wasn't just physical, it was conceptual, challenging their fundamental understanding of how conflicts should operate within structured environments. Then again, some lessons require practical demonstration rather than theoretical instruction. The enforcers could have studied physics principles for cycles without understanding how to apply them in dynamic combat situations. Zara's demonstration showed the difference between knowing something intellectually and understanding it practically. Their systems contained extensive data on physical laws but couldn't process creative applications of those principles in real-time engagement scenarios. The thing about fundamental physics is that everyone operates under the same rules, but humans seem to grasp how to make those rules work for them in ways other species don't anticipate. Gravity affects everyone equally, atmospheric pressure behaves consistently, and structural mechanics follow predictable patterns. But human creativity finds ways to turn these consistent principles into variable advantages. The enforcers weren't defeated by superior technology or strength. They were outmaneuvered by better understanding of how reality operates at fundamental levels. This entire sequence demonstrated why human improvisation frustrates species that rely on standardized procedures. The enforcers had better equipment, institutional support, and numerical advantage, but they couldn't process an opponent who treated physics as a toolkit rather than a constraint. Their training assumed certain parameters about how conflicts unfold, and when those parameters shifted to include creative applications of natural laws, their effectiveness decreased dramatically. How does one evening's violence ripple across star systems? The bar's chaotic events transformed Zara from competent pilot to traveling legend in the space of a standard week. Her reputation became both boon and burden simultaneously, attracting clients who needed creative problem-solving, while drawing challengers seeking to prove themselves against this new myth in the making. The tension came from this dual nature of notoriety. Every opportunity carried potential complications, and every contract negotiation involved reassessing risk profiles based on her demonstrated capabilities. The crew departed Gamma 7 with Crix, their cargo secured despite enforcement interference that should have grounded them for cycles. The stimulants occupied limited space in the hold, but represented significant financial and reputational investment. Crix declared the encounter a turning point in his business plan. His nervous energy replaced by calculated ambition, now that he'd witnessed firsthand what human ingenuity could accomplish under pressure. His operation shifted from cautious smuggling to strategic partnerships with someone who treated obstacles as opportunities. He vowed to hire Zara for future deliveries because "You've turned 6 Korik into abstract art using bar furniture." The statement wasn't just flattery. It reflected practical business calculations about asset protection and operational success rates. His risk assessments now included human creativity as measurable advantage rather than unpredictable variable. The galaxy's perception of humans underwent another subtle shift, from unexpectedly formidable to potentially essential for high-risk operations in contested space. This fueled a continuous cycle of new opportunities and challenges wherever her ship dropped from hyperspace. Each port brought fresh contracts from traders who'd heard variations of the Gamma 7 story, along with increased scrutiny from authorities monitoring unconventional cargo movements. The narrative left open possibilities for more improvised battles and ongoing questions about human potential, with each engagement adding layers to the growing legend while creating practical complications for daily operations. But here's the thing. Legends have a way of growing beyond their origins. The actual events at Nebula's edge became secondary to the stories that spread through shipping lanes and trading posts. Each retelling added new details. Some claimed she'd used pressure points that bypassed armor. Others insisted they'd witnessed energy fields around her hands during the confrontation. The human capacity for turning furniture into weapons became exaggerated into near mythological capabilities that defied conventional physics. This reputational expansion created operational realities that required constant management. Port authorities subjected her ship to extra inspections, while simultaneously offering preferential docking arrangements. Potential clients approached with both heightened expectations and increased caution, their business proposals reflecting this peculiar combination of desire for her capabilities and uncertainty about her methods. The same reputation that opened doors also attracted scrutiny from multiple directions, creating this interesting dynamic where advantage and complication arrived from the same source. The thing about galactic legends is they operate on their own timeline. Zara's actions continued affecting perceptions long after the actual events, with each new contract adding to the narrative, rather than replacing it. Traders who'd never visited Gamma 7 discussed the incident with the confidence of eyewitnesses, their descriptions growing more elaborate with each retelling. The human reputation for creative problem-solving became entrenched in frontier culture, referenced in business negotiations and tactical planning sessions across multiple sectors. This ongoing evolution demonstrated how individual actions can disproportionately influence species-wide perceptions in frontier space. Zara's demonstration of human capabilities at Nebula's edge became foundational to how traders, enforcement agencies, and rival species assessed human potential in high-risk situations. The practical reality of her actions created mythological implications that extended far beyond the actual physical events, transforming a bar fight into cultural touchstone that would influence interspecies relations for cycles to come. The resolution isn't in completed contracts or successful deliveries, but in this ongoing process of reputation building and recalibration. Each new system brings fresh assessments of human capabilities based on distorted versions of original events, creating opportunities that might not otherwise exist while introducing challenges that require additional creative solutions. The legend continues evolving independently, its relationship with reality becoming increasingly tangential, while its practical effects remain thoroughly concrete. Then again, some advantages can't be taught through manuals or demonstrated through simulations. The psychological impact of encountering human creativity for the first time creates lasting impressions that reshape tactical thinking across multiple species. Each confrontation becomes another data point in this growing understanding that appearance and capability don't always correlate in predictable ways. The learning process continues with each new engagement, each demonstration of how constraints can become advantages when viewed through the right perspective. This ongoing miscalculation demonstrates why standardized evaluation systems struggle with human capabilities. Their strengths exist outside conventional measurement parameters, in how they think rather than what they possess. The galaxy keeps trying to fit humans into existing categories, while humans keep demonstrating that creativity defies easy classification. This fundamental mismatch between perception and reality creates sustainable advantages that technological or biological superiority can't overcome. What makes human improvisation so terrifying to predictable species? Look across the galaxy's military doctrines and you'll find highly structured combat systems with standardized equipment and established escalation protocols. They develop technologies that follow logical progressions and train their warriors to respond to known threats with practiced efficiency. The entire approach assumes conflicts will operate within recognized parameters, using tools designed for specific purposes. This creates systems that perform beautifully against predictable opposition, but struggle profoundly when faced with creative problem-solving. Humans approach conflicts with this flexible thinking that bypasses established conventions entirely. Their tactical philosophy seems to be that if something works, it's valid, regardless of whether it's approved by military academies or listed in equipment manuals. Zara's use of bar tools demonstrates this improvisational genius operating in real time, with practical consequences. She didn't see a stool as seating. She saw potential kinetic energy delivery systems. Bottles weren't beverages but chemical dispersal mechanisms. The environment stopped being background and became resource inventory. This ability to see objects for their potential applications, rather than their intended purposes, transforms any location into a personalized battlefield. A standard spaceport bar contains hundreds of items that most species would consider decor or utilities, but humans view as potential tools. The difference isn't in the objects themselves, but in how they're perceived and utilized. This environmental creativity means humans are never truly unarmed, never completely without options, because they can weaponize their surroundings in ways that defy conventional threat assessment. Opponents trained in standardized responses cannot comprehend this adaptive approach because it operates outside their training parameters. Their systems are designed to counter known weapons and established tactics, not creative applications of physics using available materials. When a warrior expects energy weapons and gets a chair to the faceplate, their cognitive systems experience processing errors. When they prepare for hand-to-hand combat and encounter fermented alcohol applied to sensory organs, their tactical protocols offer no useful response options. The HFY thesis centers on this ability to create advantages from apparent constraints. Humans consistently demonstrate that limitations spark innovation rather than surrender. Where other species see lack of proper equipment as reason to retreat or negotiate, humans see opportunities for creative problem-solving. This isn't about being stronger or faster. It's about being more adaptable and resourceful. Their superpower lies in making do with what's available and turning disadvantages into strengths through unconventional thinking. Resolution comes from understanding that human improvisation represents a capability that cannot be easily countered or replicated. You can't train against it in simulations because it's inherently unpredictable. You can't develop equipment to counter it because it uses whatever's available. You can't anticipate its manifestations because it responds to specific circumstances in real time. This makes human creativity both terrifying and invaluable depending on which side of it you find yourself. Then again, some superpowers don't require special equipment or biological enhancements. Human improvisation stems from how they think, rather than what they possess. It's this mental flexibility that allows them to turn ordinary objects into extraordinary tools and standard environments into tactical advantages. Their greatest weapon isn't technology or strength. It's their ability to see possibilities where others see limitations. The thing about this particular capability is that it scales with challenge. The more constrained the situation, the more creative humans become. This inverse relationship between resources and innovation creates this interesting dynamic where limiting their options often increases their effectiveness. Opponents who try to restrict human capabilities frequently discover they've actually provided new materials for creative problem-solving. This improvisational approach extends beyond combat into all aspects of human operations. The same flexible thinking that turns furniture into weapons also solves engineering problems, navigational challenges, and diplomatic situations. It's not a specialized skill, but a general approach to problem-solving that applies across multiple domains. This consistency makes humans both fascinating and frustrating to species that prefer categorized capabilities and predictable responses. The galaxy continues struggling to understand how to effectively counter or incorporate human improvisation into existing systems. Military academies add modules on unconventional tactics. Intelligence agencies develop new assessment protocols, and enforcement organizations train for environmental weaponization scenarios. But the fundamental challenge remains: how do you prepare for creativity that by definition operates outside established patterns? Which brings us back to why this particular human capability represents such a significant advantage in frontier space. Improvisation doesn't require advanced technology, special training, or biological enhancements. It's available to any human in any situation. This democratic accessibility means you can't eliminate it by targeting specific individuals or technologies. It's a species-wide capability that manifests when circumstances demand creative solutions, making humans consistently unpredictable and potentially dangerous opponents regardless of apparent disadvantages. How does destroying 6 warriors affect your future employment prospects? Zara's victory at Nebula's Edge created immediate opportunities alongside long-term complications that would reshape her operational landscape for cycles to come. Reputation in frontier space operates like gravitational pull. It attracts both desirable clients seeking unique capabilities and dangerous challengers looking to prove themselves against emerging legends. This dual nature of notoriety means every advantage comes with corresponding complications that require constant management. The high-stakes job from Crix represents the lucrative side of her newfound fame. Traders operating in gray markets value demonstrated problem-solving abilities over formal credentials, and Zara's performance provided compelling evidence of unconventional thinking under pressure. His offer of 50,000 credits for moving controversial medical supplies reflected practical calculations about risk mitigation through creative capabilities. The financial rewards were substantial, but they came with moral ambiguity and legal uncertainties that would have discouraged more conventional operatives. However, the hegemony enforcers also represent the increased scrutiny that accompanies notoriety. Captain Jack Boot's arrival with his team demonstrated how reputation attracts institutional attention that can complicate operations. Enforcement agencies monitor individuals who demonstrate unusual capabilities, particularly when those capabilities challenge established power dynamics. Their interest wasn't personal. It was systemic response to someone operating outside predictable parameters and achieving results through unorthodox methods. This dual nature of reputation, both blessing and burden, shapes Zara's ongoing journey through frontier space. Each port offers new contracts from clients who've heard variations of her story, but also brings fresh scrutiny from authorities monitoring unconventional operators. The galaxy's perception shifts create new pathways while closing others, transforming her operational options in ways that require constant recalibration. Some doors open wider while others slam shut with finality. Resolution comes through navigating this complex landscape, where every victory alters future possibilities. Zara must balance attractive contracts against potential complications, weighing financial rewards against operational constraints. Her decisions influence how her reputation evolves, which in turn affects what opportunities become available next. It's this ongoing process of assessment and adjustment that defines professional survival in regions where formal credentials matter less than demonstrated capabilities. But here's the thing. In frontier space, reputation often replaces credentials entirely. Formal training certifications and institutional affiliations carry less weight than proven performance under pressure. Clients care more about what you've accomplished than where you trained or who you know. This creates interesting dynamics where unconventional operators can build successful careers based on demonstrated abilities rather than conventional qualifications. You know how most job applications ask for references and certifications? In the outer sectors, they ask for body counts and creative solutions. Traders want to hear how you handled pirate encounters, not which academy you attended. Contract negotiations focus on specific capabilities demonstrated in real situations, rather than theoretical knowledge or standardized test scores. This preference for practical experience over formal qualifications shapes how reputation develops and spreads through frontier networks. The thing about this reputation economy is that it's constantly evolving, based on new demonstrations and retellings. Each contract adds another layer to Zara's operational profile, influencing what offers she receives and what scrutiny she attracts. The balance between opportunity and complication shifts with every engagement, requiring continuous assessment of risk versus reward. Successful operators learn to manage their reputations as carefully as they manage their operations, understanding that perception often determines reality in frontier economics. This ongoing negotiation between capability and notoriety creates interesting patterns in how humans operate in contested space. Their tendency to exceed expectations through unconventional methods builds reputations that open certain doors, while closing others. The same creativity that makes them valuable assets also makes them monitoring priorities for enforcement agencies. This tension between opportunity and scrutiny becomes another variable they must account for in their operational calculations. Then again, some complications are worth the opportunities they create. The increased scrutiny from enforcement agencies comes with corresponding increases in contract values and client quality. Traders willing to pay premium rates for unconventional problem-solving often operate in sectors where regulatory compliance is flexible anyway. The reputation that attracts enforcement attention also signals capability to clients who need creative solutions to difficult problems, which brings us back to why humans seem to thrive in these reputation-based economies. Their ability to deliver results through unconventional means creates value that transcends conventional qualifications. While other species might have better credentials or more impressive technology, humans have demonstrated capabilities that matter more in practical terms. This alignment between their strengths and frontier priorities creates sustainable advantages that more conventional operators struggle to match. How can one evening alter galactic perceptions of an entire species? Zara's actions at Nebula's edge generated ripples that traveled far beyond the immediate wreckage of broken furniture and groaning warriors. The tension stems from how single events can disproportionately influence cultural perceptions and establish lasting stereotypes across interstellar communities. What began as a localized conflict between one human and 6 Korak warriors became foundational to how multiple species assess human capabilities in high-risk situations. The story of her victory mutated as it spread through spacefaring networks, transforming with each retelling to fit preconceived notions about human potential. Exotic martial arts and rumored psychic powers got attributed to all humans based on this single demonstration. Traders who'd never visited Gamma-7 described pressure point techniques that bypassed armor entirely. Mechanics working Rimward sector swore they'd witnessed energy fields around her hands during the confrontation. The actual physics of what occurred became secondary to mythological implications that resonated across cultural boundaries. This phenomenon demonstrates how individual accomplishments shape species-wide reputation in frontier space, where formal diplomacy takes second place to practical demonstrations. The narrative explores memory, exaggeration, and the organic propagation of legend through informal channels. What actually happened matters less than what people believe happened, and those beliefs influence economic decisions, tactical planning, and interspecies relations for cycles afterward. Resolution came through watching Zara's act redefine humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy through demonstration rather than declaration. Where diplomatic envoys had failed for decades to elevate human status, one evening's creative violence succeeded through sheer persuasive power. The galaxy didn't need official reports or scientific studies. They had eyewitness accounts and exaggerated retellings that carried more weight than any formal communication, which brings us to why sometimes actions do speak louder than words, even if those actions involve fermented alcohol and repurposed furniture. The practical demonstration of capabilities achieved what centuries of diplomatic effort couldn't. It forced re-evaluation of human potential based on observable results rather than theoretical assessments. The Korax incident became this cultural touchstone that referenced everything people thought they knew about human limitations and capabilities. The legacy of that bar fight extends into operational decisions across multiple sectors. Traders factor human creativity into risk assessments. Military planners account for environmental improvisation in tactical simulations, and enforcement agencies develop new protocols for handling situations involving human participants. These practical changes stem from one evening's events that demonstrated principles no manual had previously documented. Then again, some lessons require visual demonstrations to overcome entrenched assumptions. The galactic community had decades of data suggesting human mediocrity, but it took one practical demonstration to show that the data might be measuring the wrong things. Humans weren't mediocre, they were different in ways that conventional analysis couldn't properly capture or quantify. The thing about legendary events is they create their own reality separate from actual occurrences. Zara's actions became this reference point for discussing human capabilities, with each new story adding layers of interpretation and exaggeration. The actual techniques she used mattered less than the overall impression they created about human potential when properly motivated. This ongoing process of legend building demonstrates how frontier space operates on practical evidence rather than official credentials. Reputations get built through demonstrated capabilities rather than formal qualifications, and those reputations influence opportunities and perceptions far beyond their points of origin. One evening's violence created ripple effects that would shape human-alien relations for generations. Even if those actions involved alcohol-based chemical weapons and furniture repurposed as impact tools, the underlying message resonated across species boundaries. Capability matters more than appearance. Creativity trumps conventional strength, and sometimes the most effective demonstrations come from unexpected sources using unconventional methods. The galaxy learned that human potential couldn't be properly assessed through standard evaluation methods. It required observing what they actually did when circumstances demanded innovation. The thing about humans is they specialize in turning impossible situations into instructional demonstrations. Don't underestimate a species that treats obstacles as opportunities and never accepts impossible as the final verdict. The adventure continues wherever Zara's ship drops from hyperspace, and so does the education. Each new system brings fresh lessons in creative problem-solving that challenge galactic assumptions about capability and limitation. The legacy of that bar fight continues reshaping perceptions across sectors, proving that sometimes the most effective diplomacy involves demonstrating principles rather than declaring them.